The air in the east wing of the White House was still, as if frozen in time. A draft moved faintly through the corridors, too cold for spring. The shadows cast by the ornate gaslight sconces seemed to stretch longer than they should have, dancing against the marble walls like half-formed figures. Room 74, what the staff unofficially referred to as the Lincoln bedroom, sat silent. But those who had walked past it in the deep hours of the night swore silence was never what they heard. In the early years of the 20th century, the stories began. At first, whispered accounts by cleaning staff and night security guards. Doors opening with no wind, the sound of heavy boots on parquet floors, and a presence watching. But the tales took a sharper turn in the administration of President Harmon Kellogg, a stern and pragmatic man who had served in the Great War and believed little in superstition. Until 1946. It was the spring of that year when Kellogg's personal valet, a reserved man named William Dorset, filed a formal report, one not meant for public record. According to the account, at approximately 2:15 in the morning, while bringing the president's overcoat to his chambers, Dorset passed by room 74 and heard a voice. A man's voice, speaking low, measured phrases as if in debate. When he paused outside the door, it was clear one voice only, but no radio, no guests. The room had been locked. Dorset possessed a copy of the service key and, compelled by equal parts fear and duty, opened it. The fireplace was cold. The windows latched. Yet the unmistakable scent of pipe tobacco lingered in the air, as though someone had just stood and left the room. On the desk normally kept clear lay a folded piece of paper. The writing was uneven, slanted, and written in dark ink. The Union must hold. That note was never publicly disclosed. It was turned over to Kellogg's chief of staff, then disappeared. Dorset remained in service another year, but avoided the East Wing thereafter. From then on, stories increased, not just from staff, but from the president himself. Harmon Kellogg, in a rare private letter to Eleanor Merwin, a trusted friend from his time in Congress, described a recurring dream. In it, he stood at a window, looking out over a nation on fire, while behind him a tall figure in black watched without expression. The figure never spoke. The dream returned 5 times between May and September. Always the same, always silent. Psychophysiologists at the time dismissed these accounts as symptoms of exhaustion. The war had only recently ended. The pressures of rebuilding Europe and containing the Soviet threat weighed heavily on the administration. But one man, Dr. Harold Beechcroft, a civilian advisor to the Surgeon General, recorded a private paper in which he speculated that the White House itself might contribute to a heightened state of neural resonance during prolonged periods of political stress. In that paper, now stored in the archives of the Naval Medical Institute, Beechcroft referenced the architectural revisions made in the early 19th century, the reinforcement of the building with load-bearing steel, and the resulting creation of narrow electromagnetic fields in certain wings. Specifically, he noted Room 74. His hypothesis was simple, though unproven. Sustained exposure to these resonant fields during moments of heightened emotion, particularly among individuals already experiencing sleep deprivation or political paranoia, could lead to vivid hypnagogic hallucinations, visions that felt entirely real, sensory experiences mimicking external stimuli. He did not claim ghosts, but he did not entirely dismiss the possibility of recorded human presence in environments of intense historical trauma. Kellogg's reports faded from public memory, largely due to his unwillingness to discuss them publicly. But in the winter of 1952, the stories returned this time under a different administration. President Raymond Holston, successor to Kellogg and a devout Catholic, had moved his family into the White House shortly after the inauguration. His wife, Claire, took a special interest in the history of the residence, often visiting rooms and interviewing staff for a private memoir she hoped to write. One afternoon, Claire Holston spent several hours alone in the Lincoln bedroom. She claimed to be seeking inspiration to feel the atmosphere of history. When she emerged, her face was pale, her hands trembling. She never returned to the East Wing after that day. A private memo, handwritten by her personal assistant Alice Fenmore, recounts the First Lady's behavior following the incident. Insomnia, sudden aversion to certain rooms, and an obsession with redrawing the White House floor plans. She spoke repeatedly about architectural echoes and warned Alice not to trust any reflection in that room's mirror, as it showed what it wants, not what is there. President Holston ordered the room sealed after an evening in November, when their youngest daughter claimed to see the tall man in black standing beside her bed. A Secret Service investigation turned up no intruders. A mirror in the girl's room, brought from room 74 at Claire's request, was removed and destroyed after it cracked from the inside. None of these details made it into the public record. Yet behind closed doors, a quiet pattern was emerging. Always the same room. Always during periods of extreme political tension. Always descriptions of the same figure. In 1956, journalist and historian Alan Wexley was granted limited access to archived White House maintenance logs as part of his research on post-war presidential routines. Among the materials, he found repeated references to unusual power fluctuations in the East Wing wiring, flickering lights, shorted fuses, particularly on nights with high atmospheric pressure. These logs corresponded with the dates of several key events: Dorset's sighting, Claire Holston's breakdown, and even an unexplained incident during an official reception in 1949, when guests reported a sense of dread passing near the hallway that led to room 74. Wexley's findings were never formally published. 2 months later, he suffered a breakdown and was committed to a private sanitarium outside Philadelphia. The documents he recovered vanished from the record. Yet the stories endured, not merely as rumor or staff gossip, but as echoes, persistent, detailed, eerily consistent across decades. Not one witness claimed direct contact, not one account described violence or menace, and yet the presence remained. Not seen with eyes, but felt. A pressure in the chest, a whisper on the stair, a flicker of motion in the mirror's corner. The Lincoln bedroom remained untouched for months at a time. But each administration, sooner or later, confronted it, not because they wanted to, but because the House would not let them ignore it. The year was 1959. The nation stood on the edge of a nervous precipice. Abroad, the Cold War froze deeper with every month, and within the borders of the United States, a mounting tide of civil unrest simmered beneath the surface. The White House itself, long regarded as a symbol of continuity and strength, now carried inside it an unease that no one publicly acknowledged, but everyone privately feared. President Warren E. Radfield, elected on a platform of quiet pragmatism and domestic stability, was not known for sentiment. A former prosecutor, he kept his personal life away from the press and treated matters of the presidency with clinical detachment. His administration, however, would become one of the most quietly haunted in the private annals of presidential history. Not because of politics, but because of what began to occur during his third year in office. That winter, a junior member of the Secret Service named Lester Kane submitted a formal logbook entry that, under normal circumstances, would have been discarded as human error. He recorded that between the hours of 3 and 4 in the morning, while patrolling the West Corridor, he witnessed a light switch on inside the Lincoln bedroom. The room was locked. No one had entered it in several days. Kane went to investigate. His report, available now only in fragmented declassified notes, described approaching the room and hearing a slow creaking sound, as though weight shifted on old floorboards. When he opened the door, the room was empty, save for the single lamp on the writing desk. He turned it off, performed a sweep, and locked the door behind him. But when he returned to his station just minutes later and looked through the security camera mounted at the corridor's end, an early film-based surveillance system installed for presidential safety, he saw the light had come back on. He checked the feed twice. The second time, the lamp was off. He never filed a second report, but others would soon encounter far worse. In late January of the same year, the First Lady, Margaret Radfield, invited her cousin Josephine Lambert to stay at the White House during a particularly icy stretch of weather. Josephine, a schoolteacher from Baltimore, had always been fascinated with American history, and on her first evening requested to sleep in the Lincoln bedroom for the experience of it. Margaret hesitated but agreed, informing staff to prepare the room as best as possible. It had not been occupied since the Holstein administration, and the maids disliked cleaning it. There were whispers, always spoken in Spanish or in hurried French among the older staff, of a chill that clung to the bed, of pages turning on their own in books long closed, and of mirrors that briefly reflected people who were not standing there. Josephine entered the room at 9:30 that night with a book and a glass of brandy. By morning, she was found sitting upright in the bed, fully dressed, eyes open, trembling violently. She was unable to speak for nearly 48 hours. When she finally did, her words were sparse and hesitant, spoken in a near whisper to the family physician. She claimed that during the night she had awoken to the sound of weeping, at first faint, then growing louder. The room was dark. The light switch did not respond. She said she tried to call out, but her voice failed her. And then, in the faint moonlight through the tall windows, she saw the figure, tall, lean, dressed in black, standing beside the fireplace. It did not look at her. It seemed to stare through the wall, its mouth moving soundlessly. Josephine believed she was dreaming. She reached for the lamp. The light flicked on. The figure was gone. But her own reflection, she claimed, was still watching her. The official explanation given to the press was that Miss Lambert had suffered a mild, nervous episode brought on by travel fatigue. She returned to Baltimore under escort and never again discussed her night in the White House. President Radfield, upon learning the details, ordered the room closed to all guests indefinitely. He later confided to his chief of staff, Marcus Blythe, that he himself had heard sounds in the night from that part of the residence. Slow footsteps on floorboards, faint knocks, and a whisper that he could never quite decipher. He refused to move his own bedroom and demanded that no one speak of it publicly. "This house carries too much history," he wrote in a personal letter, "and some of it still wants to be heard." That same winter, Dr. Everett Malden, a neuroscientist from the University of Pennsylvania, was invited to the White House under the guise of evaluating lighting conditions and their effect on presidential sleep cycles. But the truth of his visit was more complex. He was given quiet access to architectural blueprints, allowed to inspect the wiring, the layout, even to walk the East Wing alone at night. In a sealed report later discovered among Malden's personal effects after his death, he noted anomalous magnetic fields present in the substructure beneath the Lincoln bedroom fields he could not trace to any known power source. He found minor distortions in the orientation of the bed's placement relative to these fields, and theorized that this misalignment could produce subtle disruptions in the brain's pineal gland function during deep sleep. His conclusion, however, ended not with science but with ambiguity. The final line read, "This is no longer a matter of architecture. Something else exists here, residual, intelligent, and selective in its appearance." Malden never returned to the White House. In the spring of that same year, a separate event occurred, less documented, but no less disturbing. A tour guide named Sylvia Henwick, who worked weekend shifts conducting historical tours through the East Wing, reported that during one early afternoon tour, a child broke from the group and entered the Lincoln bedroom, which had been left unlocked due to a miscommunication with maintenance staff. By the time Sylvia reached the child, no more than 9 years old, he was standing in front of the mirror, silent. He turned to her and said with unnatural calm, "He doesn't like to be watched." When Sylvia attempted to question him, the boy simply walked past her and rejoined the group. His parents denied he had said anything. Later that evening, Sylvia fell ill with a high fever and never returned to her post. These incidents did not reach the public. But within the White House, the atmosphere changed. Staff became reluctant to enter the East Wing after dusk. Lights were kept on through the night. The room was not sealed, but it was quietly renamed Storage Room E on internal documents. The original name was stricken from most logs, as if erasing the title might somehow erase the presence. But it remained unseen, unnamed, and patiently waiting. By the mid-1960s, the mood of the nation had turned from cold vigilance to internal turbulence. The White House, now under the administration of President Harold C. Winthrop, became a fortress of decisions. Civil rights marches surged through southern cities. Vietnam loomed like a distant firestorm, and within the walls of power, tensions crackled like unseen wires beneath the skin of the building. President Winthrop was not a man prone to speculation. Trained in law, molded by the post-war optimism of the late 40s, he approached every problem with the same mechanical resolve. That is precisely why his personal writings from the winter of 1965 are so deeply unsettling. In an undated, handwritten letter addressed simply to PR, believed by historians to be his speechwriter and close confidant Peter Renholm, Winthrop wrote the following line: "It is not death that unsettles me in this place, but that which tries so desperately to resemble life." The context of that phrase remained unclear until additional documents surfaced decades later in a sealed estate box auctioned in Virginia. Among those papers were private memos from the First Lady's office describing strange disturbances during a series of official photographs conducted inside the Lincoln bedroom. The shoot, scheduled for the March anniversary of President Lincoln's death, was to depict symbolic continuity, a tradition, a gesture of remembrance. But the photographer, a veteran named Aaron Halley, reported a number of anomalies. Shots blurred without cause, strange glares near the mirror, despite all lights being measured and fixed, and on 2 exposures, what appeared to be a faint silhouette behind the drapery, a shape that did not match the crew nor the furniture. The White House staff tried to dismiss it. Halley, however, insisted on developing all negatives himself. One photograph, the one never published, showed what he described as an incomplete shadow rising from the floor with no origin point. That plate was destroyed, but Halley left a sketch of the image in his journal. A narrow figure, slightly hunched, with elongated arms and what seemed to be a beard, standing precisely where President Lincoln's actual bed once stood. That same week, President Winthrop's youngest advisor, 27-year-old Michael Thorne, was found asleep on the floor outside the room's locked door. He was disoriented, unable to recall how he had gotten there. Thorne told White House physician Dr. Ellis Murov that he had fallen into an absent-minded trance while walking to retrieve papers. He remembered a voice, a low voice, repeating a phrase that sounded like, "It must be finished. It must be finished." Thorne was quietly moved to a desk position in the old executive office building and was never again seen at the president's side. Dr. Murov, however, became increasingly fascinated. A rationalist by nature, he saw patterns, not spirits. In the summer of that year, he submitted a private psychological analysis of what he termed empathic contagion phenomena in structures of national trauma. In it, he proposed that the White House might function as a vessel not for ghosts, but for unresolved national grief. His theory was based on the idea that extreme historical emotion, particularly grief tied to violent death or political upheaval, could imprint itself in subtle ways upon architecture, especially in a building continuously occupied by those under extreme psychological pressure. The Lincoln bedroom, he noted, had been the site of multiple transformations, from a cabinet room during Lincoln's time to a guest suite and finally into a symbolic monument by mid-century. Murov wrote, "This is a chamber of psychic contradiction, an altar built upon function. It is not that something resides within, but rather that something is constantly remembered into being." He concluded with one cautionary statement: "Do not underestimate the unconscious mind of a nation. It dreams too." These words might have remained mere intellectual musings, were it not for the incident on October the 21st of that same year. At exactly 2:40 in the morning, 2 Secret Service agents, Victor Renly and Isaac Morales, conducting their scheduled sweep of the upper floors, found the door to the Lincoln bedroom wide open. The room had been locked since the photographic session in March. Both men were known for their discipline. They approached with procedural calm, weapons holstered but unlatched. They would later provide identical written statements, an unusual occurrence, suggesting either extreme coordination or genuine accuracy. Inside the room, they saw nothing unusual at first. But then the temperature dropped suddenly. Renly's watch reportedly cracked from the underside. The lamp beside the desk flickered, despite no known electrical faults. Then they both heard it, a dragging sound. Not heavy, like furniture, light, rhythmic, like the slow shift of a long coat hem across polished wood. They turned toward the corner near the fireplace, and both men said they saw it, a figure, barely visible, standing motionless. The light pulsed once more, and then it was gone. Morales refused to continue night duty and requested reassignment to a West Coast post within 3 weeks. Renly remained on staff but rarely spoke to anyone outside official briefings. The next morning, President Winthrop requested the room be blessed by a priest from St. Matthew's Cathedral. The event was not recorded in the official White House schedule, and the priest's name has been redacted in every surviving document. The effect of this ritual was never confirmed. But for the remainder of Winthrop's presidency, the Lincoln bedroom was kept locked at all times, save for state inspection or cleaning under direct supervision. No one was allowed to sleep there. No one was allowed to be alone in it. Yet the presence continued to manifest not only in the East Wing, but in subtler ways throughout the residence. Aides reported misplaced items returned to drawers with no explanation. Pages of speeches rewritten in an unfamiliar hand. One case involved a note card added to the president's address on April the 15th marked with the phrase, "One nation under great strain." No one on staff claimed responsibility. The card disappeared after the speech. This period would later be referred to by internal staff as the quiet haunting. Nothing overt, no violent episodes, only a lingering sensation of incomplete business, a history not laid to rest, a figure, perhaps, who had spoken too many warnings into the stone and plaster of the house and still waited for someone to listen. Because it was never just sightings, it was the repetition, the consistency, the way those who lived within the White House found themselves repeating words they did not remember speaking, pausing by the hallway outside the Lincoln bedroom, as if drawn towards something older than memory, older than the building itself. No one claimed to see a ghost, but they all agreed. The Lincoln bedroom was never truly empty. The final years of the 1970s brought to the White House a new president, Matthew D. Callaway, a former governor from Minnesota, known for his calm demeanor and rhetorical restraint. Elected in a time of national fatigue following economic instability and scandal, Callaway's administration sought to project composure. But behind closed doors, unease remained thick in the halls, and the Lincoln bedroom, once again reintroduced on official residence maps, resumed its quiet vigilance. During the second year of his term, a planned renovation of the East Wing required the temporary relocation of several staffers to rooms typically unused. Among them was Sylvia Barris, a senior archivist from the National Historical Commission. Her task was to conduct a full inventory of documents and artifacts associated with Civil War presidencies, including original drafts of speeches, wartime communications, and post-bellum letters stored in the White House sublevels. The Lincoln bedroom, with its historical associations, was chosen as a suitable temporary office for her late-night review sessions. Barris was thorough. She arrived each evening just after 6 and remained until midnight, cataloging material without complaint. On her 12th night, she made an unusual note in her personal journal. "There is a sound in this room that does not belong to wood or wind. It is like paper rustling from beneath the floorboards. I thought it was a draft, but the windows are sealed." The entry continued. "I heard a knock behind the mirror. It was not loud, but definite. 3 slow knocks. I checked the hallway. It was empty." That same week, she informed the maintenance supervisor that the air vents in the Lincoln bedroom might be malfunctioning. She described a metallic humming that began after 9 in the evening and faded shortly after midnight. Technicians examined the vents. No faults were found. No devices present, and no active airflow in that section of the residence, which had been disconnected due to budget constraints. 2 nights later, She awoke at her Georgetown apartment with her hands covered in ink. Her fingers were stained black, her desk undisturbed. She had no memory of writing anything, yet her wastebasket was filled with crumpled note cards, all blank. She returned to work the next day, but asked to be moved to another room. No explanation was given. Around the same time, President Calloway began experiencing vivid dreams. In private logs recorded by White House physician Dr. Harlan Vogt, the president described recurring images of a narrow hallway lined with bookshelves, none of which he recognized from the actual residence. In the dream, he would walk the hallway until he reached a closed door, always the same one, heavy, wood-paneled with a brass knob. Every time he reached for it, he would wake up with the taste of ash in his mouth. Dr. Vogt prescribed mild sedatives. They had no effect. The dreams continued. During one cabinet meeting, the president mistakenly referred to the Treasury Secretary as Mr. Nicolai. No one at the table recognized the name. Later, research revealed it to be John Nicolay, Lincoln's personal secretary during the war. When asked, Calloway claimed he did not recall saying it. More incidents began to filter through the lower staff. A cleaning supervisor named Beatrice Dorr reported that linens laid out on the bed in the Lincoln room were found crumpled the next morning, as if someone had slept in them. She verified all keys. No one had entered. On another occasion, a guard named Alvin Jesper reported seeing flickering candlelight through the keyhole. But there were no candles placed in the room. Electric sconces only. Jesper was disciplined for submitting what was deemed unsupportable accounts and quietly transferred to a minor post at the Naval Observatory. But he left behind one note to a colleague found years later in a donated collection of memorabilia. He stands at the window, not looking out, looking in. The president's youngest daughter, Abigail, aged 12 at the time, experienced her own encounter. During a Saturday tour with visiting friends, she wandered briefly into the Lincoln bedroom. Having taken a wrong turn, the door had been left ajar. According to her statement, she saw a man sitting at the desk, writing. His back was to her. She apologized and stepped back. When she turned to re-enter moments later with a friend, the chair was empty and cold to the touch. No adults believed her, but she refused to walk near that section of the East Wing for the remainder of her father's term. Even during official events, she would circumvent the area entirely. The situation escalated in October of that year, when a structural team was brought in to inspect reports of minor warping in the Lincoln bedroom's ceiling. What began as a routine check revealed something far more unusual. Beneath a dislodged floorboard, in the far corner near the writing desk, a technician discovered a sealed envelope. Yellowed with age, its wax stamp long cracked, the envelope bore no postage or date. Inside was a folded sheet of parchment on which was written, in a distinctively 19th century hand, the phrase, "I do not sleep, I wait, I remember." No signature, no accompanying document. The ink had bled slightly into the grain of the paper. The note was submitted to the Library of Congress for authentication, but no match was found among existing samples from any known president or official. Rather than investigate further, White House administrative staff decided to lock the Lincoln bedroom indefinitely and list it as under preservation review. No explanation was offered to the press. President Calloway never mentioned the room in any public capacity, but in one of his final letters to a retired aide, he included a cryptic line, "There are stories inside this place that do not want to end." By the time he left office, the Lincoln bedroom was no longer marked on visitor maps. It had become invisible, at least in name. But something remained there. A presence that never left, a silence so profound it could be heard. Not every night, but often enough. In the first weeks of January, in the year 1989, President Howard Belridge stepped into office under the gray sky of a divided country. Though the Cold War had begun to thaw, the nation's nerves had not. The economy sputtered. The scars of past administrations still pulsed. His victory speech was brief, unadorned, full of clipped sentences and promises to restore decency to the institution. Belridge had no romanticism about the White House. To him, It was not a home, but a stage. He slept only a few nights per week in the residence, and when he did, he preferred the bedroom farthest from the east wing. Yet it was his chief of staff, Thomas Cray, who insisted that the president should, at least occasionally, use the Lincoln bedroom to project confidence, to maintain tradition. It was only symbolic, Cray argued. Belridge agreed. He ordered the room reopened. 2 weeks later, a steward assigned to prepare the bed discovered deep indentations in the mattress, though no one had slept there. Pillows were found disturbed, faint imprints pressed into the center as if someone had sat there, hunched forward. The steward, a 10-year veteran of resident service, noted the anomaly in his logbook and said nothing further. But over the next month, similar incidents accumulated. Curtains were found drawn closed in the morning, despite being opened the night before. A thick, scent-dried tobacco and old paper clung persistently to the air, even after repeated cleanings. One maid refused to enter after witnessing the dresser mirror cloud entirely over, as if fogged from the inside. Soon, it was the Secret Service who became concerned. During a security systems recalibration, a technician reviewing archived surveillance logs from hallway cameras noticed something that had gone unremarked for over 8 nights. At exactly the same time, 3:51 in the morning, a shadow would pass behind the frosted glass at the far end of the East Wing hall. Too tall for any of the staff on duty, always moving the same way. From the far window toward the bureau of the Lincoln bedroom, agents checked shift schedules. No one was logged in that corridor. The tapes were shown to the head of security. An inquiry was opened, but after 10 days it was closed without public report. President Belridge himself maintained a detached posture. He claimed no belief in phantom tales, but privately, he grew increasingly anxious. His personal secretary, Helen Wurst, recorded changes in his behavior. He began to pause during briefings, as if listening to something behind the walls. He asked repeatedly whether any portraits had been moved in the Lincoln bedroom. There had been none. One night, after a long budget negotiation, Belridge attempted to sleep in the room. He entered just before midnight. 2 guards remained stationed outside. At 6:30, the president emerged, pale and silent. He returned to his private quarters and did not mention the room again. Later that week, he told his brother in a private call, "I woke up and the fireplace was lit. Not a dream. I saw the flame. There was no wood, just flame, hovering there, and then it vanished." That call was transcribed by a communications aide. It was not marked for official record, but the transcript would later surface during archival reviews. The White House physician, Dr. Lena Marek, took notice. A neurologist by training, she began her own discreet inquiry, gathering informal testimonies from night staff and aides. What she found disturbed her more than she anticipated. A pattern emerged. Those who worked regularly near the Lincoln bedroom began experiencing sleep disturbances. Some spoke of hearing typing at odd hours, a rhythmic sound that echoed faintly through the walls. Others described a presence that was not seen, but felt. A distinct weight in the room, like someone watching, not with curiosity, but with judgment. Dr. Marek proposed a test. She arranged for a small team from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences to survey the room under the guise of checking air quality. Their findings were inconclusive, except for one detail: a resonance frequency. At precisely 132 Hz, the room vibrated, barely perceptible to the human ear, but present nonetheless. No machinery could account for it. It did not match the building's electrical systems. The frequency was strongest near the fireplace. The team logged it as an architectural anomaly. Marek suspected otherwise. She reached out to Dr. Wallace Klemper, a cognitive researcher known for studying hypnagogic hallucinations. Those strange, half-conscious visions that occur between wakefulness and sleep. Klemper's theory, presented quietly to Marek, was that long-term exposure to specific subsonic frequencies could disrupt sleep cycles, trigger auditory hallucinations, and even generate the illusion of presence. He emphasized, not ghosts, but the body responding to memory as if it were stimulus. These walls, if exposed to trauma long enough, may become psychological mirrors. Marek agreed, until the night she visited the room alone. According to her written account, she entered just after midnight with a notebook and a sound recorder. She sat at the desk. For 28 minutes, nothing happened. Then, she described a sudden pressure on her right shoulder, as though someone was standing behind her. The air turned dry. Her eyes watered. Then the sound. Typing, not from the recorder, not from outside, from the desk beneath her hands. The keys pressed themselves. Once, she stood up and fled. The next morning, she requested reassignment to a military hospital in Maryland. She offered no reason. The president, too, withdrew from the East Wing. By late autumn, the Lincoln bedroom was shuttered once more. Security reports about the area were sealed. One staff member jokingly referred to the space as the locked door with no key. But inside the building, fear returned. This was no longer dismissed as mere superstition. Too many had felt it. Too many had left without speaking. And those who remained began to avoid that section of the house altogether, because by then, a truth had settled into the bones of the White House. Something was there. It did not shout. It did not cry. It waited. And always between 3 and 4 in the morning, the silence shifted just lightly, as if someone had turned a page, or leaned forward to finish what they had once begun, 100 years before, winter of the year. 2000 crept into Washington without ceremony. The wind pressed flat against the Potomac, and the trees stood bare, rigid like sentinels. A new administration was preparing to move in. Packing crates lined the hallways. Velvet ropes hung across the Red Room, the Blue Room, and the East Wing. Furniture was catalogued, artwork removed for restoration. One room, however, was not touched. The Lincoln bedroom remained locked, curtains drawn since the early months of President Belridge's term. But someone had unlocked it. 2 days before the new president's inauguration, a maintenance worker named Louis Marron, a quiet man with no history of agitation, failed to report to his assigned post. When security began its sweep, they found the Lincoln bedroom door slightly ajar, the lights inside flickering. The room was empty, except for Marron's work belt on the floor beside the desk. His flashlight was still lit, batteries fresh. A search was launched, blueprints reviewed, the entire East Wing examined. No signs of struggle, no prints, no disturbance. Marron's file was later sealed by order of the residence manager. No official report was released. To this day, his disappearance remains unsolved. The incoming president, Charles Harrow, arrived at the White House under a banner of renewal. Young, confident, untouched by scandal, Harrow came with his wife, 2 sons, and a desire to re-establish the symbolic heart of the presidency. In his first week, he made an announcement during a private press luncheon. The Lincoln bedroom would be reopened to visitors, restored to full historical accuracy, and included in the public tour path once more. Within days, restorers arrived. Fresh linens were laid out. The wood was polished, carpets vacuumed, portraits rehung. Yet from the moment the work began, something went wrong. The room would not stay clean. The bed sheets, freshly pressed, showed faint impressions each morning. Not footprints, not stains. Just depressions, shallow and precise, as though elbows or knees had pressed down for hours. Twice, the room temperature dropped without explanation, despite fully functioning thermostats. A bouquet of roses placed on the nightstand withered by the next morning. Not from neglect. They were fresh the night before. Restorers reported headaches, dizziness, and nausea after spending more than an hour inside. One, a woman named Teresa Gay, claimed she heard whispers from inside the closet. She quit the next day and later told a newspaper, "It wasn't words, it was breath. Like someone was about to speak but never did." President Harrow remained undeterred. In his 3rd month, he invited a documentary team to produce a short feature on the White House's architectural history. Among the crew was a sound engineer, Franklin Yates, who brought with him high-sensitivity recording equipment designed to pick up faint vibrations and anomalies for later cleanup in post-production. On the third night of filming, Yates left his recorder running overnight in the Lincoln bedroom purely to gather ambient sound. The next morning, he retrieved the device. The audio was reviewed 2 days later. At first, it was unremarkable. The occasional creak of the old building, faint hum of the ventilation. But at time-stamped 3 hours, 52 minutes, everything changed. Footsteps, slow, uneven. Then, the sound of a chair sliding back, followed by the unmistakable clack of typewriter keys. Not rapid typing, just one word. Then silence. Then another. The pattern repeated 4 times, and then came breathing, deep, ragged, human. Yates, a veteran of 30 years in production, resigned the same day. The tape was handed over to the residence director and archived. Not destroyed, not denied, just hidden. By midsummer, rumors had returned, though never openly acknowledged. Guests avoided the East Wing after nightfall. Resident staff developed the habit of placing fresh water outside the Lincoln bedroom without entering. No one could explain why, but the practice became routine. President Harrow began to change. His speeches turned hesitant. His pauses grew longer. During one press conference, he stopped mid-sentence, stared toward the camera lights, and said, "He's still waiting." The statement was dismissed as rhetorical confusion, but Harrow's inner circle grew concerned. He took to wandering at night, never accompanied. One guard reported finding him standing in front of the locked Lincoln bedroom door just before dawn. The president said nothing and returned to his quarters. Harrow later confided in his personal advisor that he had begun to dream the same dream over and over again. In it, he walked down a corridor lined with mirrors. Each mirror showed him standing still except one. That one showed a tall man with sunken eyes and a stovepipe hat, seated at the desk in the Lincoln bedroom, writing. Always writing. His pen never lifted. The sound of scratching filled the dream. And then the final image. The man would stop, raise his eyes, and look directly into the mirror at him. That fall, during a routine inspection of the attic space above the Lincoln bedroom, a civil engineer discovered a cache of forgotten boxes wedged into the upper joists. Among them were pages of handwritten correspondence never previously catalogued. The paper had no dates. The ink had faded, but the words remained legible. Most were draft letters, wartime reflections, fragments of speech. But one note, unsigned, was circled twice in red pencil. History is not made by the living alone. Memory must be inhabited to survive. And in this house, memory has taken form. No author could be confirmed, but the handwriting bore striking resemblance to that of President Lincoln. The document was quietly sent to the Library of Congress under sealed cover. No record of its arrival was ever confirmed. Today, the Lincoln bedroom remains part of the official residence, but rarely used. The room is cleaned weekly, but never at night. Guests are not placed there. The fireplace remains empty, and yet visitors sometimes report a smell burnt paper, stale tobacco, faint and persistent. They say they feel watched, not with malice, with expectation. The White House has offered no public comment, and so the question remains. Who lives in the Lincoln bedroom? Not a ghost, perhaps, but something that endures beyond breath. A presence formed by memory, grief, duty, and silence. In the heart of the house, behind a locked door, the past does not sleep. It waits.